Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon as well to our witnesses who are online. I believe all of the witnesses this afternoon are online. We have two panels today. The first panel, we have the pleasure of welcoming Martin Bureau, who is the Vice President, Innovation and Head of the PFAS Center of Excellence. I believe we have spoken before. Indeed, we have spoken over Zoom. Thank you for being here today. It's much appreciated. From the Okanagan Basin Water Board, we have Executive Director Anna Warwick-Sears. And from the Prairie Provinces Water Board, we have the Chair, Ms. Nadine Stiller. Each witness has 5 minutes to deliver their opening remarks. We will start with Mr. Bureau for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Tout d'abord, c'est un honneur d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Je suis
Inaudible for the interpreter.
En anglais depuis Seattle, où je suis à commercial.
Pardon, monsieur. Il y a un appel au règlement.
Oui.
The interpreters are having trouble here.
OK. Apparemment, les interprètes ont un peu de misère à vous entendre.
Oui. Est-ce que
Une question de volume.
Is it a volume issue on your end?
Parce que le test de connexion a bien réussi. Hein,
oui, tout à fait. Puis mon signal est parfait, je dois dire. Est-ce que le son est-ce que c'est acceptable? Ça serait de valeur de vous manquer.
Les interprètes, est-ce que c'est mieux pour Monsieur Bureau? Est-ce que vous pourriez peut-être nous décrire un peu où vous êtes et le temps qu'il fait à Seattle?
Je suis à Seattle. Il fait un temps magnifique. Il fait environ 10 ou 12 degrés et je suis à la réunion des Landfill Managers de Waste Connections, le numéro 3 du domaine des landfills en Amérique du Nord, qui ont adopté nos technologies pour traiter les PFAS. Est-ce que j'espère que
je vais vous donner. Je vais vous communiquer ce que. Ce qu'on va faire, c'est que, Monsieur Bureau, on va vous revenir après les.
So, Mr. Bureau, we'll get back to you after the other two witnesses. We're going to try to solve the sound issues. Now we'll go to Ms. Warwick-Sears for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? I'm just going to assume so. So I'm coming to you from the Okanagan Basin Water Board. We are a local government agency, a partnership of Okanagan local governments, and we have a mandate since 1970 to take leadership on valley-wide water issues. We're one of the fastest growing regions in Canada, and we're one of the most water-stressed regions in Canada. And while it's really good to see the federal investments in housing, we're going to need good drinking water to supply those homes. I want to talk to you about two really urgent issues that require timely investment by the Government of Canada right now to avert massive costs and suffering in the near future. The first is the impacts of extreme weather on fresh water. We had catastrophic flooding in 2017 and 2018. Last year with the big West Kelowna fires, in addition to destroying almost 300 homes, the wildfires came very close to destroying a multi-million-dollar Rose Valley water treatment plant. At the same time, this summer, we're worried about the Duto Plateau, which is where all of our reservoirs are on the east side of the Okanagan Valley. These reservoirs provide water for 90,000 plus residents and represent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of agricultural production. Today, right now, BC snowpacks are at historic lows. So we're going from a drought last year into a drought this year. Water utilities are right now meeting to plan of how to avert conflicts between drinking water for residents, farmers, irrigation, and fisheries needs. So I'm here to ask the Government of Canada to further invest in disaster mitigation and adaptation funding, to expand efforts to prevent damage from the floods, the droughts, and the wildfires, as well as expand water storage, upgrade irrigation systems, and fund drinking water infrastructure. The time for this investment is now. It takes a while for the funding to flow, and recovery is vastly more expensive than proactive mitigation. The second thing I want to talk about is invasive mussels that threaten our lakes. The Government of Canada is investing heavily in managing aquatic invasive species in the Great Lakes, but right now $0 are being invested to prevent invasion of zebra and quagga mussels to Western Canada. These invasive mussels are typically brought in by mussel-fowl boats. Most of these mussel-fowl boats are coming from Eastern Canada, which means it's an interprovincial issue and merits federal involvement. The basins of the Columbia, the Kootenay, and Okanagan and Fraser basins are all at risk from these mussels because of our water chemistry. There are projections that the invasive mussels will cost BC more than $139 million annually. The CBSA must also be involved because there's just been detected invasive mussels in the Snake River, which is also part of the Columbia Basin. So federal resources are urgently needed right now for the BC invasive mussel defense program. So in summary, local governments in BC are facing intense threats to fresh water from the extreme weather events and from these invasive aquatic species. The costs of the prevention and proactive mitigation are small compared to the extreme costs to repair or even manage the damage. These are national scale challenges that can't simply be transferred to the provinces or local communities. And we're risking losing our local ecosystems, our salmon runs, our quality of life, our cultural values, and severely impacting local communities. So we're asking the government to invest in local government flood, drought, and wildfire mitigation. And we're also asking that the federal government provide equivalent resources to Western Canada as are given to Eastern Canada so that we can prevent aquatic invasive species, and particularly invasive mussels, coming to our area. We also finally request that the federal government fully implement the recommendations of the report on aquatic invasive species by Commissioner Julie Gelfand. I believe this came out in 2019. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Warwick-Sears. We'll go now to Ms. Stiller for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, my name is Nadine Stiller, Chair of the Prairie Provinces Water Board since 2018. I'm also the Executive Director with the new Canada Water Agency branch within Environment and Climate Change Canada. Today, I'm representing the Prairie Provinces Water Board. I'm honored to be joining you from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, Oji-Cree, Dene, Dakota peoples, and homeland of the Métis Nation. Water management in Canada is a shared responsibility between all levels of government, and the legal framework for water management is complex. In summary, the provinces hold primary responsibility for water quality, water use, and allocation within their borders, including drinking water and wastewater services. The federal government is responsible for fresh water generally through national regulations and monitoring programs. Both levels of government deliver programs to promote healthy aquatic ecosystems. In the prairies, water generally flows eastward from the Rockies in Alberta through Saskatchewan to Manitoba before draining into Lake Winnipeg and Hudson Bay. Managing water effectively across the prairies is critical for both economic prosperity and the well-being of its residents, including a significant Indigenous population. This unique system relies heavily on snow melt runoffs, so precipitation variability makes the region highly susceptible to extreme conditions like droughts and floods. Droughts that are long-lasting over multiple years pose the greatest challenge. Climate change is intensifying these variations, making strong interjurisdictional collaboration essential. The Prairie Provinces Water Board was established in 1948 by the 3 provinces and the federal government. However, by the 1960s, the growing water demands from provinces indicated the need for a more robust system. So in 1969, the Master Agreement on Apportionment was established, and the board focused on equitable sharing of transboundary waters in the prairies. While it has no enforcement mechanism, the agreement is a powerful instrument that fosters cooperation, enables dispute resolution between provinces, and has proven its function for over 50 years. Schedule A and B of the agreement establish a 50-50 formula for annual natural flows between adjacent provinces. So each province uses and/or receives 50% of the natural flow. The board determines the natural flow computation methodology and calculates apportionment balances. Schedule E, introduced in 1992, specifically addresses water quality for 12 transboundary water bodies. The federal government performs water quality monitoring that supports a 5-year cycle review of water quality objectives. Additionally, a new Schedule F for the cooperation on groundwater and aquifer management is in process of being added to the master agreement. There are 3 key factors that contribute to the board's success. The master agreement on apportionment commits provinces to a fair portioning of water, protecting both water quantity and quality. Provinces benefit from long-term planning certainty, knowing their water allocation and responsibilities. Secondly, consensus-based decision-making allows issues to be addressed before they escalate into conflicts. Thirdly, the board, comprised of senior water resource officials, fosters collaboration across similar mandates and shared goals with equal decision-making power. The board is supported by a secretariat and 4 permanent committees that include hydrology, flow forecasting, water quality, and groundwater. The board is cost shared equally between federal and provincial governments. Environment and Climate Change Canada funds and conducts water monitoring activities at the transboundary locations. The board's strength lies in its commitment to consensus by involving all parties, fostering a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect amongst provincial governments, the primary water regulators. The collaborative approach has ensured consistent compliance with the master agreement. Thank you on behalf of the Prairie Provinces Water Board for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. On retourne à Monsieur.
Back to Mr. Bureau. We're going to give this another shot. So on to you.
Il me fait plaisir.
It's my pleasure to speak to you again. Do you confirm that the sound is adequate?
Our company, Ultra, had already started to treat PFAS. We were contracted to remediate soil and groundwater that had been contaminated by AFFF, aqueous film-forming foam full of PFAS, because of a leaking tank on a Canadian military base. We treated 4.5 million liters of groundwater using a combination of our own technology at the time, foam fractionation, and media filtration, achieving removal efficiency of 99%. Another major project was completed in 2013 after the terrible Lake Megantic accident, where we treated all the water that was used to put out the fire after those 72 rail cars blew up. The petroleum fire was extinguished in 2 days using nearly 33,000 liters of a concentrated AFFF again, with more than 64 million liters of water. Ultra treated all that hydrocarbon and AFFF contaminated fire water, achieving 99.6% removal. In 2022, we executed the largest PFAS remediation project in Canada at the Borden Canadian Force Base, dealing with 10 million liters of highly contaminated AFFF and hydrocarbon contaminated groundwater as well. After many pilots and testing over 10,000 PFAS samples in our lab in Montreal, we have developed an expertise that we're spreading throughout North America, and now we are operating the first of its kind clean water as a surface PFAS treatment plant aimed at achieving a guaranteed level of PFAS removal in contaminated leachates at a Waste Connections, which is the third landfill manager company in North America, landfills in Rosemont and Rich Valley, Minnesota. As you well know, PFAS, the forever chemicals, are everywhere, and they vary from site to site. They end up in our surface water, groundwater, leachate, effluents, from wherever sources they origin from. Industries, contaminated sites, landfills, airport, military base, and so on, which we then have to treat downstream at drinking water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants. At that stage, their concentration turns out to be very low, yet too high for our health, but still very diluted. And we've seen that just recently in La Presse yesterday, Sainte-Cécile-de-Milton aquifer being contaminated by PFAS from a well-suspected close-by upstream source. Treatment costs at that level become extremely high. A large publicly owned treatment plant could easily spend on a daily basis $500,000 worth of consumables to treat PFAS, consumables only. This is not the solution. PFAS need to be treated or addressed, captured, eliminated at their sources. First and foremost, we need to eliminate their use in manufacturing processes and in manufacturing goods, or manufactured goods, sorry. We also need to eliminate emissions from their various sources, wherever they are, whether they're solid, liquid, or gaseous. Especially focusing on liquids now, because this is the most urgent and most important type of emission to deal with right now. And that's what Ultra is dedicated at doing. The bottom line is our water resources face escalating strain, demanding urgent action. Current efforts have proven insufficient in integrating resilience into our strategies for safeguarding and conserving water resources. Canada must act promptly. These actions we propose are the use of PFAS must be strictly prohibited across a range of applications in Canada. We also need to include comprehensive declaration of their content, ensuring transparency and safety for consumers and the environment whenever they are used. We also need clear and robust regulatory actions. It is vital to enact the draft objectives for PFAS in Canadian drinking water before the end of this year, 2024. From these drinking water criteria, we can derive then surface water, groundwater, soil criteria, and so on, and act. It is imperative also that federal government, through its key agencies, expedite the issuance of much anticipated RFPs for comprehensive PFAS decontamination across the country. This includes orphan sites, airport, military base, brownfield under the federal jurisdiction. Financial support must also be provided to other governments level in Canada to address PFAS contamination resulting from federal sites, like we have seen in aquifers downstream of military base and airport sites throughout the country, and especially in Quebec last fall. Finally, it is essential to allocate specific funding to support demonstration and implementation of Made in Canada innovative solution for PFAS decontamination. This strategic investment will not only advance the effectiveness of remediation efforts, but it will also spotlight Canada's capability to innovate and lead in the environmental scene at the global stage. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Bureau. Very interesting. We're going to move on to questions. We will begin with Mr. Cram for 6 minutes, please.
Very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. Yes, there's a lot to cover. It's a shame that I only have 6 minutes, Mr. Chair. But let's start with Mr. Bureau. Well, first of all, thank you for all of your work that you do on PFAS decontamination. I was wondering if you could share for the committee, where does PFAS come from? And when you suggest that PFAS should be strictly prohibited, what would be some of the implications of prohibiting PFAS?
Well, PFAS are useful chemical compounds that have been used for a lot of applications in our world, whether it's for Gore-Tex, Teflon, anti-stick pans, or to put out fires. They have this inherent property of not being affected by the environment, extreme environment in particular. So that turns out into burn resistance or stain resistance or friction resistance component. As a result, they end up in everything or almost everything we fabricate. The textiles around you, if you have polyester on you, the varnishes on your table, and also all those sites where hydrocarbon fires have been put out, or where we tested foams for their quality of putting out fires of hydrocarbons. As a result, all those small fires that all those firemen tested with the new recent foam was essentially digging a hole, putting some diesel, using the foam, and then leaving it, to put out. The result is that this sank into the ground and in the aquifer. So that's one of the very important sources of PFAS in our community, and they're all linked with military base and airports. And then you have industries who use them, and then there's landfills who, as a result of all our use, end up having those PFAS into their landfills, and their leachate or their emissions are essentially sources of PFAS. As a result, you have PFAS in your blood. I have PFAS in my blood too. There's in fact no blood sample that do not contain PFAS in general. I have never tested a PFAS sample, a suspected PFAS sample that did not have PFAS into it, ever.
Are there readily available alternatives to PFAS that could be used, or are they necessary for that particular type of firefighting foam or for other uses? Because I understand we don't want PFAS in our bloodstreams and PFAS in our waterways, but at the same time, if it's necessary to put out fires, there certainly are some benefits as well.
So the simple answer is yes, there are alternatives, and they work. The thing is, this is a proven family. Well, this is a family of products that have proven performance. As a result, and because our regulations are done in a certain way, this molecule is being banned or this other molecule is being banned. But, us chemists are very clever at adding a new branch to the molecule. It changes name, and then it's a whole new molecule. So we need to ban the whole family of fluorine-based compounds for all those non-essential use. Now, there are a few exceptions. If it were only exceptions, we wouldn't be in the position we are now. So yes, alternatives exist.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bureau. I would like to switch gears now to Ms. Stiller. Ms. Stiller, you talked in your opening statement about the new Schedule F for the cooperation on groundwater and aquifer managements. How can this schedule be implemented while at the same time respecting the rights of farmers and ranchers and other landowners?
The schedule is not yet added to the master agreement. It's in process. We're waiting on one of the provincial governments to complete their order in council. There is a committee that is a committee of the Prairie Provinces Water Board on groundwater, where all the provincial regulators and federal experts come together to determine areas that need to be studied or analyzed and to recommend preventative action. That work is done from a compliance perspective with the master agreement on apportionment. But all of the partners, all of the members of the board are very clearly vested in the prairies and understand the important relationship with the agriculture community. So we don't directly engage necessarily. And it's also very early days in terms of how Schedule F will be implemented. But there are many other non-governmental organizations across the prairies that engage directly with agriculture sector to promote and implement best practices to prevent and mitigate pollution both in surface water and subsurface aquifers.
And also, this committee has heard several times about the economic and environmental benefits of irrigation projects. Can you share your thoughts on how the Canada Water Agency can play a positive role and what is the best way to move forward with major irrigation projects?
We only have about 20 seconds, so I don't know. You could also later on, in answer to a question, work that in somehow, but go ahead, Ms. Stiller.
The provinces are fundamentally the regulators of irrigation development within their borders. So representing the board today, the board really serves a monitoring and compliance function to make sure that the water quality parameters and water quantity parameters are accorded in the master agreement are met.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Ali for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today to share your experience, expertise, and insights. My first question is for Ms. Stiller from the Prairie Provinces Water Board. The 1987 federal water policy recommended further use of mechanism like the Prairie Provinces Water Board to address potential water conflicts between provinces and territories. Could you please suggest what best management practices and lessons learned from the Prairie Provinces Water Board can be applied more broadly to interjurisdictional water cooperation in Canada, such as through the Canada Water Agency?
Canada has several mechanisms that are intergovernmental boards. The Mackenzie River Basin Board comes to mind, and in that agreement, there are requirements for bilateral agreements between adjacent and neighboring provinces. So what these boards do is give a more regional-based perspective in terms of water management considerations. They function to address or prevent conflict, and they also function as an information forum where concerns are brought forward by neighboring provinces and with the intention of finding consensus and finding resolution to any particular concern. So the two domestic water boards, I chair both of them, represent a significant portion of the drainage that occurs in Canada. The Mackenzie River drains 20% of our land base, and I would really suggest that the bilateral agreements that are embedded into that master agreement really function to resolve, prevent, and manage across provincial and territorial boundaries.
Thank you. My second question is for Ms. Sears for the Okanagan Basin Water Board. Does the Okanagan Basin Water Board have any enforcement abilities?
No, we do not. We are an organization of local governments, and the local governments have some bylaw authority, but really all that enforcement comes from the provincial government.
And what are the board's current challenges?
The board's current challenges are dealing with climate change-related extreme weather events, like I was discussing. There's also the issue of invasive mussels. This is why I brought both of these issues forward to you. These are issues of the local government's greatest concern. There's always some water quality challenges, always challenges in communicating generally with the public, but primarily we are interested in maintaining and upgrading our infrastructure for water and protecting the quality of the lakes and streams in the valley.
Thank you. Is there a role for the federal government to work more closely with the Okanagan Basin Water Board?
Yeah, the federal government has been involved in recent years primarily through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They are supporting this massive salmon restoration project that's happening in the Okanagan. 80% of the Columbia River sockeye salmon and a significant number of endangered Chinook are reared in the Okanagan, and then they swim south down into the U.S. and out the Columbia River through into the Pacific. So we are working with the Okanagan Nation Alliance to support that restoration, doing the water science that's necessary to improve the habitats. And the DFO has been involved in that. Otherwise, the federal government is not super engaged in any of the other Okanagan water issues. We do have some meteorologists around, and we work some with the Water Survey of Canada, who have a certain number of hydrometric monitoring stations here, and we work with them to expand the hydrometric monitoring network.
Thank you, Chair. How much time do you have?
A minute.
Okay. My next question is for Mr. Bureau and Ms. Seve from ALTRA. Given that there are over 4,700 PFAS, the Environmental Law Association recommends the promotion of code management and regulation of PFAS as a class with the objective of working towards zero discharge and virtual elimination, end code, rather than addressing PFAS PFAS one by one. Are you satisfied with the government of Canada's progress in risk assessment of PFAS substances under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 1999?
For about 30 seconds max, please. You're on mute, Mr. Bureau.
First of all, we are happy that this risk assessment has been made, and after looking at it, we can witness that it's extremely proactive and advanced in terms of regulation compared to other bodies in the world. However, it does not go fast enough. The EPA has already, in the States, has already stated their drinking water limits, and they are enforced as of last week.
Thank you. We'll have to stop there, unfortunately. We've gone over time a little bit. Madame Posé.
Oui. Ms. Posé. Maybe Ms. Posé will want to pick up where you left off. I would have actually asked the same question. First, I'd like to welcome everybody for being here today. Just like Mr. Bureau, I wanted to ask you a few questions, but I will let you finish the answer to Mr. Ali's very interesting question. I'll continue in French. Here's what I was going to say. Necessarily, this will go very quickly. The EPA already implemented its rules last week. We are currently wondering when we will implement our own. We consider that we are a few years late with regards to the United States, which is quite rare. However, we can catch up on this delay because the technology has evolved significantly. I've started working with PFAS to commercialize our technologies 4 years ago. Now we are at the commercial level and we can fix current problems now. But 4 years ago, it was a different situation. There is healthy competition in the industry. Many solutions are available and complementary ones as well. And complementary problems as well. So it's very possible for us to catch up. You've been talking about competition, and perhaps I'm naive, but I often say that when it's a question of health, we should be collaborating rather than competing. And I would say that I agree that you are correct. You've been working in the environmental sector for 15 years, and you've occupied various director positions, and with other organizations as well. I think that you're somebody who has a lot of competence and relevant skills. Last time we had a witness, Mr. Sauvé, we talked about various technologies and equipments that can help identify the presence of PFAS. They might also help us to eliminate PFAS as quickly as possible and the most possible. I always talk about prevention, but your company, Ultra, is solicited to act on various sectors. With regards to water treatment, can you tell us what detection and elimination of eternal pollutants is at? I do know this professor. He's an eminent professor. When we talk about characterization, detecting, and identification, he is one of the best experts in the world. We are at the remediation level. We talk about destroying PFAS, for example. These technologies are efficient, and the concentrations are also very high. So we are in the chain more towards the source rather than towards the end of the chain. So we want to find solutions at the very source. We are looking for solutions that are not very expensive, and this would help us to fix the problem downstream. And the remediation costs are usually astronomical. In a recent call for tender in Saguenay, cost came to $11 million for 3 water wells over 5 years. That is not a profitable solution. You can't invest this much money every year in Canada for all wells. So what we have to do is find solutions at the root and remediate on site. In this case, the federal government recognized that the site is at least partially related to the Bagotville site. Yes, with regards to Saguenay, you're very correct. And I agree with what you're saying, that we have to have a preventive approach. And you've practically answered my second question with regards to the finance. How much money are we talking about if we want to implement infrastructure that can detect PFAS? So $11 million for 3 wells. These are astronomical prices. With regards to detection, it's not that expensive. It's the remediation that's expensive. Here's an example. We know what the source is. There's a water source, and we need to remediate on that site. Market prices would be $1 or $2 million typically per year. We fix the problem at the source. If the water is continuously generated, it's per year. If it's just a remediation site, then the water is dealt with locally and there's no longer PFAS. Usually that would cost about $2 million. If you do this later down the line, then it would cost at least typically $1 million a day. So $1 million a year, and punctually, 1 or 2 million, or you have a situation where you'd be paying $1 million a day. So this is a situation that is applicable at the Montreal water treatment plant. There aren't a lot of PFAS there. There are other sites that have used them in the past. For example, at the Marcotte site, it's $1 million a day because I've calculated it. I'm speaking pretty generally, but this is pretty much what's happening. Thank you. On to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think there's a theme here around how if we fund and invest in the mitigation efforts up front, we can prevent some of the more extreme costs. And I want to start with Ms. Warwick-Sears with some questions, but I also have some questions for Mr. Bureau. Hearing what you had talked about just in terms of the gap in disaster mitigation funding. At committee this past fall, we pushed for and passed a motion calling on the federal government to establish a $1 billion freshwater security fund for British Columbia in partnership with the BC government and private partners. And unfortunately, this security fund was missing in this week's budget. Can you talk a little bit about what a freshwater security fund for BC would mean for your organization and your region?
Yeah, so let's use the fire risk up on the Duto Plateau as an example. This is going to take maybe $5 million a year for a number of years in order to do the wildfire mitigation work. It involves cutting down non-market timber, and so the forestry companies who do it have to be compensated. The current size of the BC Provincial Watershed Security Fund is $100 million, which would provide $5 million a year for the entire province. So on one project in the Okanagan, we could use up the entire amount of current provincial funding. The funding for this type of work back in the 1990s in the Forest Renewal BC days was the equivalent inflation adjusted of about $60 million was going out every year. So it's we're just not able to do the work. It's very expensive. The impacts are coming either from the extreme weather, which is coming collectively from the rest of Canada and globally. And the costs are just astronomical to keep up with this. Years of just ignoring the problem.
You also mentioned the discrepancy from kind of east to west, and we have seen some significant funds for eastern provinces, and the number that you had mentioned, especially when it comes to invasive mussels, that British Columbia is getting $0. That's pretty striking. And when it comes to disaster mitigation funding, BC has been hardest hit. We have had extreme flooding, evacuations from wildfires. We've had heat domes that have, killed hundreds of people. I feel like BC in particular is in desperate need of this kind of funding. Can you talk a little bit about that discrepancy?
Well, I don't want to say anything bad about the Canada Water Agency, but most of the funding for their freshwater fund is going to the Great Lakes in Eastern Canada. I think there is some funding earmarked for the Fraser Basin. One of our arguments for the federal government to get more involved in prevention of invasive mussels is there seems to be no recognition of the fact that the Fraser Basin, which is one of their priority watersheds, is also at super high risk of invasive mussels. I think, the balance of the population in Canada is in Eastern Canada, but most of the resources are coming from Western Canada. And I think, it could be a lot more equitable. And by having more resources up front, like Mr. Bureau is talking about, we can save the federal government billions of dollars from having to send us disaster response funds to repair all the damage that happens with the massive impacts to local infrastructure from these extreme weather events.
Thank you so much. And I feel like the lesson of for every dollar we spend on the upfront, building climate resilience, the amount that we save is just astronomical. Mr. Bureau, actually, Chair, how long do I have? Okay, maybe we'll just start with a bit on the PFAS. This week I tabled a motion in the House calling on the federal government to treat PFAS as a class, to regulate under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, to combat some of the misinformation that the industry has put forward around PFAS, and to ensure that PFAS are phased out of firefighting turnout gear as quickly as possible, but also to fast track the process to list PFAS as a class on Part 1 of Schedule 1 in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Can you talk a little bit about how we need to, and I'll have another 2 minutes, so we'll probably get an answer in that section, but I'd love to hear a bit more about how we can align with the European Union and the U.S., establishing a timeline for phasing out PFAS in products, and especially that European roadmap for phasing out PFAS.
Sorry. I'm not an expert in all those laws from Europe and the U.S. However, I know quite a bit as well. The Europeans have taken a long time to deal with PFAS. As a matter of fact, they still don't have criteria for their treatment as of now. However, they have addressed a very interesting way to. They have taken a very interesting way to address them. What they do is they have started surveying all suspected sites of PFAS throughout Europe. Not all countries, but Switzerland, Holland, Belgium, France, etc., are doing that. And so they're gathering data, and this is a very rapid process. It started last year.
Merci, Monsieur Bureau. Malheureusement, là, on a dépassé le temps.
Thank you, Mr. Bureau. Sadly, we're over time. I did allocate a bit more time, but there will be a second turn, and then you might have time to dig into the answer.
It's going to be a little truncated because of time. We'll do 3, 3, 1.5, 1.5, 3, 3. So we go now to Mr. Mazier.
Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up with Ms. Warwick-Sears. Why do you think the federal government's resources are not going to Western Canada?
I mean, you guys are in the House of Commons. I don't know. I don't understand it. It doesn't seem logical. Doesn't seem fair. It's been this way for a long time, and I think I would ask your committee to look into it. Really, it seems like our costs, the costs of the damage, will ultimately go to the feet of the federal government with the big federal government disaster funding. So I don't know why the federal government, or frankly, the mitigation from the invasive mussels, that's going to be a huge cost as well. I don't know why the federal government wouldn't want to provide funding up front and lower the cost to all of the Canadian taxpayers in the future.
Yeah, I think you're kind of in agreement that you want a more proactive or conservative type of approach, conservation type of approach.
Yes, absolutely. This is true for all manner of water issues, and I think all of the panelists here would agree on that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stiller, how is the Prairie Provinces Water Board dealing with falling water volumes, basically drought? And does this stress the water sharing model?
A couple of years ago, the Prairie Provinces Water Board did a drought simulation exercise to evaluate the resiliency of the master agreement. That was an excellent learning opportunity for the provincial regulators to take away considerations in a real situation. Fundamentally, the board doesn't take action directly towards managing drought, but through augmented hydrometric monitoring, we are able to provide as a board additional data to help the provincial regulators better anticipate the implications of drought. I would just close by adding the prairies naturally experience drought on a cyclical basis, and indeed that is exacerbated by the effects of climate change. So the Prairie Provinces Water Board presents a forum to help collaborate across the jurisdictions to address those challenges more effectively. And I'll close by saying that the master agreement, regardless of the cyclical variability that happens in the prairies, has always been complied with. So we are able to maintain the equitable sharing thus far.
Thank you. Mr. Van Couverden for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's clear to most people that we need to do more to limit the release of potentially harmful and toxic chemicals like per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, as they go into our environment, particularly as they are biomagnifying into our bodies and bloodstreams, as has been described. Human beings almost waited too long to act on chlorofluorocarbons. Gratefully, our ozone is finally starting to repair itself, but we've definitely waited too long to fully appreciate the warming impacts of excessive carbon dioxide emissions. We need to do more, not less, to limit the manufacture, use, import, export, and release of these harmful chemicals. There are a lot of stakeholders asking for PFAS to be fully classed as a toxic chemical under the Canada Environmental Protection Act, which will tie to our study. But at the same time, Big Plastic, which is a large group of multinational oil and gas companies that convert oil and gas to plastic in order to produce items like single-use plastic bags, straws, and packaging, much of which contain harmful PFAS, seems to have gotten to some Conservative members. Conservative MP from Saskatchewan, Corey Tucker, has used his private member's bill to try to amend the Canada Environmental Protection Act to remove all plastic manufactured items from the list of toxic substances in Schedule 1 to that act. Conservative MP Tucker trivializes the importance of having a comprehensive list of Class A toxic chemicals, saying that he's bringing back the plastic straw. So my question is to Mr. Bureau. It's clear to me that the Conservatives opposite are also supportive of this legislation, and they'd love to see more PFAS and more plastic pollution in our waterways and in our bodies. That's great. It's not limited to straws, but anyway. So my question is to Mr. Bureau. Would eliminating the legislative basis for underpinning the regulatory ability to prevent plastic and PFAS pollution, would that undermine action to prevent further contamination of our waterways, environments, and bodies?
So I don't do politics. I'm a scientist. I'll start by doing that. The key to success to remediation and impactful measures is as a few harms, one of which is regulatory constraints. That's the wind that makes the boat move. That's the most important thing. If regulatory constraints are not in place and to a meaningful way, and in a meaningful way, or an addressable way, because it could go too far too, then there's simply no actions. If the EPA bans PFAS and calls PFAS as an hazardous substance wherever they are, including at landfill sites, the industry will stop doing anything. It's going to go to court, and it's going to last for 10 years. So that's an example of going too far, okay? And there's examples of doing too little. I mean, it's clear that we need to divulge the PFAS presence in components that we manufacture.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Posé, vous avez le temps d'une question, là.
Thank you. On to Ms. Posé. You have a minute and a half for another question. My question is for any of the witnesses who wish to respond. We're always under the impression that there are no issues with water in Canada or in Quebec because of the proper management of water sources. We have this false perception that water is abundant and that it is of good quality, even though it is being polluted and there are droughts. Are there any of our witnesses who have any thoughts on the federal government's role in order to change the wrong perception we have of water in Canada? Ms. Sears or Ms. Stiller?
Sure.
Yeah. What can the federal government do to change the perception of water in Canada? It's hard to say. It's really a deeply embedded misperception that is down at the level of the public. It is an issue because we are proud of our water. We're rightly proud of our water. Water issues, when they occur, tend to occur relatively locally. I'd say with the exception perhaps of the prairie provinces where they are experiencing a multi-year deep drought. I think that the federal government, by being more engaged in water and being more in the forefront of talking about water, it's something that the Canada Water Agency could potentially do, reaching out and publicizing more information.
Oui, je vais vous arrêter sur l'Agence canadienne de l'eau, surtout en respect.
I'll stop you there with regards to the Canada Water Agency. What's most important is to respect the jurisdictions of provinces and territories.
Be at the forefront of a new level of engagement, policy-wise on water. Ms. Collins.
I just wanted to give Mr. Bureau the opportunity to explain a little bit about that roadmap, the mapping out of sites in some of those European countries and what we could have as lesson learned.
So Europe and the States now with Plan 15, I don't have time to explain, but you'll refer to it, are listing all the sources of PFAS and putting a number onto each of those. And then there'll be a plan for action, and the roadmap is very clear with dates. Like 25 and 26 is the moment where those remediations start, depending on type of sources, landfill being at the forefront of that list. As a class, Canada has still not listed PFAS as a class. We're right now looking at the sum of 28 or 18, depending on the list. The states have done the same. Still individual PFAS, not a class. Whereas in France, in Europe, sorry, they're looking at a whole class action. I mean, not class action, but action on a full class of PFAS, which is definitely the way to go. I heard that the drinking water guidelines might include a class, but as far as I know, it has not been done so far. 28 PFAS among thousands and thousands is really nothing. I mean, let's face it.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Leslie for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Ms. Warwick. You mentioned wine. Obviously, the Okanagan is notable for producing some great wines. I'm just kind of curious, is there a lot of reliance on irrigation in that area, and what is the usage compared to other users? And secondarily, I know internationally there's a bit of a shift towards dry farming, the idea of using less water to have the roots go deeper and create a more flavorful grape. Is that being adopted within the region as a means to reduce the amount of water use?
Yeah, definitely. The wine industry is one of the more progressive of all the agricultural industries that are here in the valley. Most of them have moved to highly efficient drip irrigation and are definitely managing water for grape quality. Our wine has got an emphasis on high quality rather than volume. Right now, we are struggling. 90% of the grape vines were killed this last winter because of extreme cold event that happened right after an extreme warming event, which the plants couldn't take. So there's a big replant program going on. We anticipate that the irrigation systems will be further upgraded with that replant program. With respect to irrigation in general, many of the other perennial crops like cherries and peaches and apples, many of those farmers still need to upgrade their irrigation systems. I mention it to you because a lot of that funding historically has come from Agriculture Canada to help the farmers replace their systems. And by helping the farmers, we help maintain food security in British Columbia and Canada.
Thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, one of the first things this Liberal government did when they came into power was to cancel the Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnership Program, which supported habitat restoration across the country, working with recreational and angling groups. In your neck of the woods, do you feel the federal government is doing enough to support those on-the-ground groups that are trying to enhance fisheries populations?
I don't work that one-on-one with those groups and what their specific things. We have close relationship with BC Wildlife Federation. In general, most water things are underfunded here in British Columbia, whether it's wetland restoration or there's quite a bit of work and some funding actually from the U.S. to restore our salmon fishery. That funding goes to the Okanagan Nation Alliance and their work on the sockeye fishery. Yeah, we would very much welcome more federal involvement in freshwater in the interior of BC.
Super. Alors ça termine.
Fantastic. That ends the second round. Or rather, Mr. Longfield, I'm very sorry. You're right. I had crossed out. I had doodled and crossed out your name accidentally. Go on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Ms. Bureau, I met with the International Association of Firefighters, Guelph Local 467 this week, and they were talking about PFAS in terms of firefighting equipment and in terms of the foam that's being used and the health impacts on firefighters across Canada. And they're asking for the full class of PFAS chemicals under C Part 1, Schedule 1 to ban the uses of PFAS, to support the reclamation and safe disposal of firefighting gear and foams containing PFAS, and to assist fire departments and municipalities with the cost transition to PFAS-free protective gear, monitoring the health of firefighters exposed to PFAS in their workplaces. On one of those items that they're asking us to pay attention to is on the reclamation and safe disposal of firefighting gear. They described to me how after a fire, when the gear is soaked with foam, over time that builds up. And I had an image in my mind of my hockey bag. Sometimes you don't want to put that equipment on. Is there a way of recovering equipment that's being contaminated with PFAS? Is there technology available that the federal government could be supporting?
Absolutely. There are many ways of dealing economically with contaminated gears. Now, it depends on what it is exactly and the level that needs to be reached, depending on the exposition of workers or firemen in this case. I would be cautious about textiles because of it's less easy to decontaminate those, so probably those should go to safely or secured landfills or burning, incineration. However, for many of the other gears, it's totally doable and possible to do so.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Stiller, I'd like to go over to thinking of the prairie provinces. I'm also originally from Treaty 1. I'm thinking of the tension between the hydro developments off Lake Winnipeg, the Nelson and the Churchill, the GenPeg generating station that's used to control the lake level in terms of taking hydro power off the lake, but how that impacts the Indigenous communities in St. Laurent on Lake Manitoba or Norway House on Lake Winnipeg. Could you comment on how allocations could be used to balance between hydropower needs and the needs of the people living on the lakes?
I'm limited to say that the apportionment calculations are really at the provincial the provincial boundary between Saskatchewan and Manitoba in this example. And then what Manitoba does or Manitoba Hydro does in terms of regulation is really within the Manitoba jurisdiction. So the board really is functioning at the provincial boundary sector.
Merci. Alors, notre deuxième tour est terminé pour de vrai.
Thank you. So that concludes our second round for real this time. Thank you to all of our witnesses for this very interesting conversation. We will take a short break to welcome the next panel and connect them. Thank you once again for your availabilities and hopefully see you again. It was a pleasure.
Donc, bienvenue au deuxième panel.
Welcome to our second panel. We have three witnesses. As individuals, we have Mr. Roy Brouwer, Professor and Executive Director from the Water Institute at University of Waterloo. We also have Frédéric Lasserre, full professor at University Laval. We also have the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We will start with Mr. Brouwer's opening remarks for 5 minutes.
Monsieur Brouwer n'est pas à la table.
Mr. Brouwer is not actually here yet, so we will start with Professor Lasserre for 5 minutes, please. Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to share my thoughts on the dynamic of water governance. I will insist on the fact that for a long time, and I believe this is something that has been already mentioned, we've insisted in Canada on improving water quality as though quantitative measures were not important. There is this perception in Canada that we have an abundance of water, which means that we haven't managed it better. Of course, it's true that we are very lucky in Canada. We have this great resource, but it does not mean that we don't have to think about the approach with regards to managing quantities. With regards to quality, here's what we might observe. There's, first of all, the scandal of the very bad quality of water in Indigenous communities, even though they've been insisting for decades, legitimately, to improve the quality of their water. Still, many Indigenous communities do not have drinking water resources, which is scandalous and paradoxical. There has been an improvement in the rest of the country in the quality of the Great Lakes and rivers after a lot of mobilization due to provincial powers. Despite this improvement of quality, we see that there is the increase of pollution from agri-food, but also that kind of pollution is more difficult to manage because it is more diffuse in origin. So it is a lot more difficult to manage. In Quebec and elsewhere in Canada, this source of pollution is rampant. With regards to the quantities, here's what we might observe. There is more tension with regards to sharing the water in various regions. For example, in Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan, but also in Quebec. This might be shocking to some people as they are not accustomed to having to think quantitatively with regards to water management. There is a lot of financial vulnerability from the agricultural sector who needs more and more irrigation. Biologically, it might not be necessary. And so in the east of Canada, there is more and more irrigation that is being used because of the water or because of rainfall. More and more resources are being mobilized and used. But there's also an increased amount of urbanization, which means that there are modifications in how water is managed in humid area zone management. And of course, when there's an agricultural sector nearby, then there is a bit of a conflict with regards to water usage. In the Estrie and Beauce area, as well as British Columbia, this is a reality. Of course, then there's climate change. We don't really know where that's headed. And of course, that means that there could be a change in precipitations, less snow, which means less water trickling down, but also increased evaporation, which means that there might be deficits in water. That, of course, changes the dynamic in managing the resource. There's a question that is relevant. There are legal decisions that have prevented the export of water towards the United States, and that is hotly debated in Canada. For now, it is not a very current debate, but it is a concern. And in the United States, there's an increasing concern with water governance as well. Thank you very much for your time. On to Mr. Brouwer. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Brouwer, for your opening remarks.
Honourable Chair and members of the Standing Committee, thank you very much for your invitation to participate in this hearing today. I'm a professor of economics and director of the Water Institute at the University of Waterloo, one of the largest interdisciplinary water research and innovation centres in Canada. I'm originally from a seemingly similarly water-abundant country, just many times smaller than Canada, that has a long history of freshwater challenges. And I advised the Dutch water ministry as an economist for several years on national and European water policies, in particular the Water Framework Directive. What sets this directive apart is its emphasis on the use of economic principles, methods, and policy instruments such as water pricing to achieve the environmental objectives for freshwater bodies. And it's my view that if we want to solve freshwater challenges in Canada, we have to focus more on the necessary behavioral changes to more sustainable water use and management by making better use of the available methods and instruments that behavioral economics has to offer. This includes appropriate water pricing. Water has value but no price. In Canada, the existing price of water does not reflect the true cost and value of water. Canadians are among the largest water users in the world, with an average water use per capita that is almost twice the amount consumed in Europe. Only 10% of this water is used for drinking and cooking. Approximately a third of our drinking water is used to flush our toilets, and another third is used for bathing. Water-saving technologies are readily available on the market, but are hardly implemented because water is relatively cheap. Hence, there is no financial incentive to save water. Many, if not most, Canadians take water for granted, except if you live in a community with a drinking water advisory. Public awareness levels of the value of water are generally speaking low. Based on public surveys in Ontario, I find, for example, that only 25% of the Ontarians know how much they pay for water through their water bill. In terms of water affordability, most Canadians do not spend more than 1% of their annual income on water and wastewater treatment. This is the same in Europe, where consumer spending on water and sanitation is less than 1% of GDP in most member states. The same applies to industry. For example, when they apply for a license to extract groundwater, industries pay an administrative fee which is not in any way related to the value of the groundwater. Notwithstanding the complexities around trade and the definition of commodities, the federal government should consider how best to use economic principles and instruments to ensure water users pay for the value of water. The current low level of public awareness and the low price of water affects how we use, overexploit, and waste Canada's valuable freshwater resources. These freshwater systems serve both as a source and a sink. We tend to focus on the extractive use of water and often forget that after we use the water, it's treated and discharged, free of charge, into rivers and lakes. We pay for the cost of wastewater treatment in treatment facilities, but not for the water system's ecological purification service or the impairment of this service. Just as we pay for the treatment costs of water for drinking, but not for the source itself. This is crucial if we want to raise people's awareness about the value of water and the increasing pressure on freshwater resources due to over-extraction and water pollution. Appropriate pricing of Canada's freshwater resources will incentivize households and industry to use water more efficiently and increase investments in water-saving and less water-polluting technologies. A final observation is that we lack key indicators that help us transition to a more sustainable water economy. There are no national data about how much Canadians pay for essential water services. This information would allow us to assess the impact of water pricing on water use and the level of cost recovery for sustainable delivery of these services. The latter is crucial to address the grand challenge of replacing aging infrastructure across Canada. Water rates have been unable to cover the depreciation costs of this infrastructure. In 2021, losses from the water distribution system due to leaking accounted for 17% of all water produced in Canada. This is 828 million cubic meters of potable water, enough to meet the needs of 10 million Canadians for a whole year. Similarly, with a growing population and increasing freshwater contamination by emerging chemicals of high concern, the need for more advanced wastewater treatment is growing. Although more than 80% of Canadian households are connected to a municipal sewer system, there's a wide variation in treatment levels across provinces. New sustainable business models are needed based on sound economic principles to build back water infrastructure better in the future, manage our freshwater resources in a sustainable way, and secure water for all Canadians. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. We'll go now to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and Ms. Heidi Tadros, Strategic Advisor, will speak to us. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the invitation and opportunity to contribute to this committee's freshwater study.
Strategic Advisor, formerly the Director General of the Environmental and Radiation Protection and Assessment Group at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. With me today is my colleague Melissa Fabian Mendoza, Director of the Environmental Risk Assessment. We are joining you from our homes on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. The CNSC recognizes and acknowledges the importance and value of freshwater to Canadians and Indigenous nations and communities. While our regulatory requirements apply to a breadth of technical topics and all environmental components, for the purposes of this committee, I will highlight how our regulatory framework and processes ensure protection of freshwater from nuclear facilities and activities. The CNSC's regulatory framework provides applicants and licensees with clear requirements and guidance to follow, such as our regulatory documents on environmental protection, in conjunction with the Canadian Standards Association, or CSA, suite of standards relevant to environmental protection. These documents are found on the CNSC website. The CSA series, N288, for example, includes requirements and guidance related to environmental risk assessments and environmental monitoring programs. We incorporate national and international best practices in our regulatory framework. For any new project, proponents are required to conduct an environmental assessment under applicable legislation. CNSC staff work with other federal departments, such as Environment and Climate Change Canada, Health Canada, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, to technically evaluate submissions based on the best available science and research. As part of this evaluation, applicants must provide sufficient baseline data, scenarios, and programs to demonstrate that there will not be significant adverse effects from the project on the environment, including freshwater. The duty to consult also sets out legal obligation related to adverse impacts on potential or established constitutional rights of Indigenous peoples that the Commission must meet. These potential rights must be assessed, considered, and where appropriate, accommodated by the Commission. For existing projects, CNSC staff use ongoing compliance oversight, including inspections of licensees' environmental protection programs, reviewing cyclical updates to environmental risk assessments, and reviewing environmental monitoring data that must be submitted as per license requirements. In addition, the CNSC has an independent environmental monitoring program, or IEMP. This program provides a snapshot of the state of the environment around nuclear facilities. We sample and analyze water, vegetation, and air in publicly accessible areas around nuclear facilities. The IEMP sampling plan is also informed by interested Indigenous nations to ensure we capture material that is of significance to the community. IEMP results are publicly available on our website, while other data, such as effluent and emissions data reported to the CNSC, can be found on the Open Government Portal and the Open Science and Data Platform. Finally, I would like to note that we have a joint initiative with Environment and Climate Change Canada called the Regional Information and Monitoring Network of the Ottawa River Watershed Basin, RIMNET. The purpose of this initiative is to enhance the availability of publicly accessible environmental monitoring data and Indigenous knowledge for the Ottawa River Kitchissippi Watershed Basin. We recognize the Committee's interest in the Commission's recent authorization for Canadian Nuclear Laboratories to construct a near-surface disposal facility for the disposal of low-level radioactive waste at the Chalk River Laboratory site. Please know that due to the ongoing judicial review of this decision, we are limited in what we can say in relation to this project. We, as well as the Commission, welcome the Court's direction on this file. In conclusion, the CNSC is committed at all times to ensuring that there are no unreasonable risks to Canada's freshwater resources from Canadian nuclear facilities and activities. Nous nous ferons un plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
It will be a pleasure for us to answer your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will start the first round with Mr. Mazier. Go ahead.
Chair, my questions are for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission this afternoon, and it's around Chalk River, and mostly to get some get some real facts out here, and hopefully you can clear the record here. So how many years did the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission spend evaluating the safety and environmental impact of the near-surface disposal facility at Chalk River?
Thank you for the question. And I do recognize that there's a lot of interest around Chalk River. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, there is a judicial review in play right now, several, from concerned citizens on the decision. I can't really speak to the files specifically. All of this information that you are seeking in terms of when did we start, how much engagement consultation happened, what is the state at the Chalk River site based on the proposal to build the near-surface disposal facility is found in the Commission's decision. And I welcome the opportunity to perhaps provide the decision to the committee members for your review as you go through your deliberations and discussions on this study. And I really don't want to say anything more on the NSDF because I think the judicial courts will have a lot of information in hand.
So can you submit the Safety Commission's record of decision for the near-surface disposal facility in Chalk River?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be critical, actually, so the analysts can evaluate that. So I did ask just the question. I don't know if you can answer it or not. It was just, how many years did you analyze this? So I guess you can't answer that one. Is that correct?
Well, what I can share is that the Chalk River site is not a new site. It's a site that has a lot of characterization, a lot of history, and a lot of monitoring data, whether it be for water, but also air, vegetation, animals, ecological sites. There's been a lot of studies at the Chalk River site. So all to say, it's a very well categorized site from an environmental perspective, whether it be on animals or on other biota. With regards to the NSDF, the Near Surface Disposal Facility, the application that we received was in 2016. So we have gone through several reviews of this application, and as I said, a lot of information is found in the Commission's decision as to from 2016, all of the technical analyses that have been done on this project are found there.
So the committee heard testimony that the near-surface disposal facility at Chalk River will threaten drinking water, and I quote, poison the Ottawa River, end quote. Are these statements true, and how do you respond to them?
Thank you for that question. Maybe I'll start and then I'll ask my colleague to share her thoughts on this. So let's just maybe put it into context. Radiation, nuclear substances are regulated. They are hazardous substances. They are regulated for that purpose. We don't prohibit them because we recognize there's a benefit from them. So that's the difference between sort of regulation versus prohibition. So in the regulation of nuclear substance or nuclear activities, we have a very robust regulatory framework. And as I mentioned, not only do we look at impacts or effects to fresh water or to the environment, but we look at all hazards analysis. And I know this committee is interested also in climate change analyses and all the rest of it. So maybe we can get into that as well. Coming to your question about sort of the pollutions going into the Ottawa River from the near surface disposal facility, any project and all projects need to demonstrate that any risk to exposure is mitigated. So there are mitigation measures that start from the environmental assessment stage. It is looked at to determine what programs are needed, what monitoring is needed. If there is a spill, how do we prevent the spill? How do we clean up the spill to eliminate as much, again, mitigate as much as possible the risk to the environment and to peoples? So perhaps I'll stop there and see if my colleague would like to add anything more.
Thank you. I would just echo the comments that Ms. Tadros has already provided and just elaborate a bit further to say under the CNSC regulatory framework, there really is extensive oversight in ensuring that the environment is protected. This includes, for example, an environmental risk assessment that evaluates all potential releases and their pathways, an environmental monitoring program, and monitoring data that's provided to the CNSC on a regular basis, where our specialists are also looking at that in great detail. So all that to say that the overall environmental management system as a whole works together to ensure that the environment is protected, and that's a very key part of the CNSC mandate to ensure that that is done.
What were the most common misunderstandings or misconceptions raised by Canadians during the assessment for the disposal of Chalk River?
So again, maybe a lot of that information can be found in the decision because there was a wealth of interventions that came both for the project and against the project. And CNSC staff's approach to this is very much down the middle. We were looking at the safety case. We were looking at the information presented, and that information was the basis of our technical evaluation. And again, a lot of that information and how the commission came to their decision is found in their record of decision and the rationale.
Sorry, so I don't know if you got the question though. From your experience, what is the most common misconceptions? Like the Canadian public needs to understand, like it's complicated. I mean, it is a new science that's going on in Canada here, but what is the most common thing, and how do we turn that narrative around?
We only have time for the most common thing, and we can get into the turning it around in the next question. But what comes up? I guess Mr. Mazur is asking what fear comes up the most. Is that pretty much what you're? Go ahead, Ms. Tadros or Ms. Fabian.
In general, is a fear of understanding of radiation, fear of understanding the health impacts of radiation, fear of it being too close to water bodies and areas where people can get exposed to it. I think that comes up regularly.
Thank you. We'll go to Madame Chatel now.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I also have some questions for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. My riding is right along the Ottawa River. We are, in fact, just across from Chalk River, and so it's a very important hot-button issue in my riding. And, of course, it's concerning to have radioactive nuclear waste by this river that that is so close. I have gone in person and seen this waste. It is there. It is exposed on the riverbank. And they are exposed to extreme weather events. So, yes, there is some concern there. I also want to talk about the landfill facility close to the surface. In the Commission, it is talked about and detailed, but I'd like you to confirm which waste matters will be put in that landfill, and will this improve the current situation for the waste to be there in a building that was built from the 1970s. They're right on the border of this river. What I understand is that waste will be destroyed because it was contaminated, and that material then will be transposed elsewhere in a more secure fashion. Will this project improve the current situation on the site? Point of order, Mr. Chair. Ms. Posey. I thought to myself that I would not go ahead with a certain topic because of legal. Please, inaudible. I would just like to finish. So I have pages and pages of questions. Can you please repeat your point of order? Yes. Well, I don't think. Was it not a point of order? Inaudible. I just want to hear what it is because I didn't quite follow what Ms. Poussey was saying. I've stopped the time. The waste management facilities are being brought up, but I didn't think that we could talk about it because there is a legal review on that issue. So this is why I'm a bit surprised that it's coming up. I assume that we can ask the question. But I also think that if we can talk about it, then with regards to the point of order, just a moment. It's the witnesses might not answer to those questions. Ms. Chatel, the legal review is on the consultation and not on facts with regards to Chalk River. So I don't know what my colleague is trying to bring up. Are you trying? the member trying to prevent me from talking about an issue that is important in my riding? Let's just move on. And the witnesses have the right not to answer if they believe we are talking about something that we should not be talking about. Please go on, Ms. Châtel. As I said earlier, my question is on the waste management facility close to the surface. Is putting waste on this, is the waste in that facility going to make this situation more safe? Thank you. I will answer in English to make sure that I have the right terminology.
So as per the discussion that you've just had, we will not be able to speak to specifics on the near-surface disposal facility, not just because of the consultation aspect, but the Commission's decision speaks for itself. There's a wealth of information in the record of decision on every aspect that you're looking for in terms of what CNL has proposing, how CNSC staff did their technical evaluation, and in the end, what rationale the Commission used to make their decision. In general, though, we can go definitely through how CNSC staff do their work. And coming back to your question with regards to what is currently at the Chalk River site, effectivement, you are right. There is low-level radioactive waste everywhere. It is in different areas, and it is currently managed safely on site. That is part of CNL's requirement to have a radioactive waste management program that manages waste no matter where it is, whether it be in a disposal facility or in bags or in buildings. So the radioactive waste that is currently at the Chalk River site is being managed safely. Now, is there an opportunity to do better? I think that's what all of our licensees should be looking for. So I'll stop there and see if there are any other questions.
Merci.
Thank you. Hypothetically, if Ms. Posé wanted to bring, this waste to her riding in Repentigny, apparently it would take 47,000 times of traveling to bring all of this to Repentigny. Was that included in the Commission's decision?
Merci encore pour la question. The quantities of low-level radioactive waste that were discussed for this file are indeed within the Commission's rationale for decision, and it's part of the background and the context behind which both CNSC staff did their work, as well as what the Commission had to look at to be able to rationalize their decision.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. On to Ms. Posé. I'm going to ask a question to the CNSC as well, but not for too long. In your opening remarks, you read that you said that you were on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe people, and when I saw that, I heard that, I immediately thought of an Algonquin community that is actually genuinely on unceded land, and I think that your organization should acknowledge that. I won't go on further with that, but I would like some details, and I'd like you to give us some written information to the committee. There's the Independent Program for Environmental Surveillance. I'd like you to send to the committee, as you say it's independent, how it is independent, how does it work, whose jurisdiction is it under, and can you talk about the Indigenous community that is included, and are they really part of this environmental surveillance program? Now I'd like to have a yes or no answer to this question. Ms. Tadros, you said in your opening remarks that you integrate the best international and national programs into your rules. So if the cabinet makes a request to the Atomic Energy Agency to include Artemis, would you welcome that measure? Yes or no? I just want a yes or no question because I have other questions for Mr. Lesser. Yes, excellent. So we'll work on that. Mr. Lasserre, you are a member of Santu. Your research is on water geopolitics. I believe that that is a subject that we haven't talked about much in our meetings. Here's my question. What merits the Canadian government's attention with regards to a strategic issue? What would you say to that? Well, I talked about it briefly. It is a very relevant question. Thank you. I talked about it because it is part of a recurring debate in Canada that has been ongoing for decades. We've been wondering if there's any pressure from our United States neighbors to, well, we know that there is pressure from the United States to buy water resources from Canada. There are reports that have been picked up by the media that corroborate this. And there are organizations, professional organizations and government organizations in the United States who work on irrigation and engineering companies in the United States as well who push for this. So various actors are feeding this concern. There may be a request from the United States to improve their situation with regards to water governance, and they might turn to Canada because we have an abundance of water. And instead of managing or governing the water properly, which would require more efforts, the United States would turn to us. So, of course, this debate does exist. There have never been any formal requests from an American government, to my knowledge, in order to buy any Canadian water. There was a concern which gave way to bills in order to improve water governance and limit the possibility of exporting water from Canada to the United States. Now, this is something that is changing, or changeable rather, in the United States. Of course, there's climate change impact, and the resource could be dwindling. Of course, in the west of the United States, public debate has come to the conclusion that they could potentially buy water from us. I'm not saying that this will happen, but it is a possibility in the public debate in the west of the United States. Do you see this resource as a source of tension geopolitically, short-term or long-term? We can't predict climate cycles. We know that there's more drought, for example, and that has an significant impact. Could that be the source of geopolitical tensions? I'd like to say between the United States and Canada, but you have so much experience that perhaps it could be across the planet. Oh, yes, of course. I believe there are a lot of political tensions or geopolitical tensions with regards to water. Of course, this does contribute to political tensions in Central Asia, in the Middle East. I can give you a lot of examples on how the tensions around water can contribute to poor relationships between various states. And even companies sometimes fuel this tension. There are, in certain areas, mobs every summer, and there are deaths. Between the United States and Canada, do you think that in the future, when things get worse, there could be geopolitical issues? Well, yes, because that is a possibility. Like I just said, I don't want to be alarmist. I'm not saying that it will happen, although it's been mentioned in various debates. I'm just saying that we should keep in mind that it is a possibility. The speed at which climate change is having an impact, especially in the west of the American states, it's a possibility. There's a current structure in the United States. 80% of their water is used in the agricultural industry. The climate change is speeding up, and so public forces and the agricultural sector may or may not have time to adapt to their practices to this current reality. Thank you. We will stop there. And on to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the witnesses for being here. Just maybe first opening up with the CNSC, the determination about Chalk River that the CNSC put forward was that the CNL has adequately consulted and accommodated Indigenous groups, yet 10 out of the 11 federally recognized Algonquin communities have objected to the project for years. In our parliamentary study on nuclear waste, we heard testimony about this, and yet the project was approved in January. It really begs a question on how the Nuclear Safety Commission is complying with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and how these communities are going to have free, prior, and informed consent around projects. I understand that you probably can't speak too much to this, but if you have a very brief comment.
Thank you for the question, and you're right.
Point of order,
I don't
yes,
mean to be.
Excuse me, so I have a point of order. Yes.
Chair, just on that, I don't know why you can't speak freely. We're trying to get to the bottom of what is actually the risk to the water, what is to the risk of those people, and you keep on telling us to refer to the document.
I don't know if
I don't know. I just hope that you become a little bit more open on what your testimony is actually
I don't know
saying.
if that's not. I don't think that's a point of order. In my limited experience, but anyway, I think the point's been made. The point's been made, even though it may not be a point of order. So, okay, go ahead, Ms. Collins.
Maybe I'll quickly, I do want to ask a few other questions to the other witnesses. And in particular, I have concerns about water privatization and the commodification of water. I think, especially when I think about everyday Canadians, but also people around the world who have these kind of deep concerns. But one of the things that you mentioned struck me, and that in Ontario, the bottling industry pays like just around $500 for every 1,000 cubic meters of groundwater that they extract. That seems appalling. Can you speak a little bit about how we can hold these kind of industries more accountable, and what is required to make sure that they aren't extracting water to the detriment of communities?
Yeah, so I think foremost what is needed is that we value the resource itself, because what they're paying for is an administrative fee that is not related in any way to the water that they are extracting. So it used to be $3.72 or something like that per 1,000 cubic meters, so like almost 1 million liters. They just added $500 to that after they had like a 2 or 3 year moratorium here in Ontario, I believe, to not issue any further permits to the bottling industry. It is completely unclear to me from the outside where that $500 comes from. It's still very low. I pay 5 times more for a liter of water in Kitchener-Waterloo, where 80% of my drinking water is groundwater.
Thank you so much. And maybe turning to Dr. Lassière, just curious if you have any comments around the privatization of water, but also around industry's impact on groundwater and bodies of water.
This debate on the relevance of rates rather than privatization and rates on water to better manage the resource is relevant. There are many studies and behaviors with regards to water governance, especially in Europe, that include rates on water, because it provides leverage to change behavior and make sure that the users pay for their money, pay for the resource, rather. Indeed, it has been demonstrated that when the resource is paid for with variable costs, so the more you consume, the more you pay, without a flat rate, then there is actually change in the behavior. There's an idea that is rampant in the rest of Canada, and they talk about volumetric rates. In a lot of regions, however, it is a flat rate, especially in Quebec. People pay because it is included in their municipal taxes, but they don't know it. So there is no impact on the consumption of water. We can have a debate on the political relevance of implementing such rates. There would also be public debate. If there are rates that are included, will that lead to privatization? And that, of course, is a bit scary. There have been reports on the excess of privatization in Europe over the last 2 decades, and publicly, sometimes there's no justification between, rates and privatization, which is a part of the private sector. The goal of a company is to make profit, which is legitimate, and so sometimes we lose control on this rate on the rates.
About as the low snowfall, the impacts of reduced snowpacks, in particular, BC and Western provinces are experiencing multi-year droughts. Can you talk a little bit about some of your research around how this is impacting Canada and what the government needs to do to address it?
Ça aussi, c'est une question.
That is also a pretty big question. Here's what we've observed in the mountains in Canada and in the United States. There isn't necessarily a reduction of precipitation year-round, but it's just the mode of precipitation. So before climate change 2 or 3 decades ago, when it became an issue, there was a lot of precipitation. Some of it was by snow, and there was a reservoir that progressively melted, and that meant that the rhythm was actually quite constant, and so it would come down through the rivers right when we needed it during the summer. Here's what we're observing more and more. The quantity of water and precipitations is not going down, but it is increasingly coming down as snow as rain in the winter. So in the spring and in the summer, there will be a lot less snow melting. Sadly, we've gone over. So on to the second round, and Mr. Leslie will take the mic. We will have shorter rounds, so from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, so that we can end on time. Mr. Leslie, the floor is yours.
3 minutes. Okay, in that event, I'll use my time actually to move a motion that was put on notice last Friday.
Could you just stop for a second? I got to take down the Mazier Collins. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm just referring to the motion that the committee report to the House its recommendation that the Liberal government abolish the consumer carbon levy, more commonly referred to as the carbon tax. Premiers and leaders of all political backgrounds have come out opposed to the Prime Minister's 23% carbon tax hike, and there is clearly momentum and a growing groundswell of support to scrap.
Yeah. Just on the terminology, I don't think it is a tax according to the Supreme Court.
Well, this
when
is
the money is put back
debate.
in the pocket of families.
Yeah,
it's important. So
yeah, but I mean, it's a people will debate it till kingdom come.
When you take a levy and it's paid back to people,
I understand.
it's not a tax.
I understand. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
I will be sure to correct when Liberal ministers screw up in the House of Commons and accidentally call it a carbon tax instead of a price on pollution. I will call them out on it. Absolutely. I think that is critical that we be honest.
Mr. Leslie has the floor. Mr. Leslie has the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, that there is clearly momentum and a groundswell of support to scrap the carbon tax once and for all. From Liberals to NDPers to Conservatives, there is now an emerging consensus that the Prime Minister's 23% carbon tax hike was wrong and is punishing everyday hardworking Canadians across this country. And while the rural member from Milton likes to accuse anyone who disagrees with him of being a climate change denier, I don't think he would say that about the Liberal Premier from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I hope he wouldn't accuse the over 130 First Nations in Ontario that are taking the government to court over the carbon tax of that. He seems to save that vitriol for Conservative MPs who are proudly standing up for their constituents and their views. But that's not to say that this Liberal government hasn't attacked the Liberal Premier from Newfoundland and Labrador, and the Premier actually just came out publicly stating that the Prime...
Excuse me, another point of order, yes.
Yes, I'm just wondering, given our time constraints, what the relevance of these comments are to the motion he's putting forward. These seem to be very politically motivated, and he was putting forward a motion
I
on the
would
carbon
agree.
tax.
Yes,
Or
I
the
would
price
agree.
on
It's
pollution,
politically
rather, if there is
motivated.
no carbon tax.
Sorry, it's not a carbon tax, right?
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay,
It's price of
order.
pollution.
Colleagues, we have guests today.
Your
We have
motion
guests.
refers it to it such, but you're right,
We
it
have
is not,
guests.
and I'm glad you've acknowledged that.
Oh, absolutely.
Colleagues, we have guests, and we want to be on our best behavior, but that wasn't a point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
And I was just, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I was just saying that the Premier of Newfoundland just publicly stated that the Prime Minister has tried to bait him with a, quote, certain ad hominems and name-calling. And I don't think the Liberal members on this committee would call the NDP Premier of Manitoba names for opposing the carbon tax, nor the Saskatchewan NDP leader. So instead of
have you read your motion? Have you read it yet?
I did. It's on notice, so I just read the summary of it. I
understood.
can happily read it into the record if you'd like, but I just wanted to...
No, it's all right. It's okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask this question?
Yes.
What is the relevance of this debate to the motion? That's what I'm trying to establish. Maybe it's not a point of order. I'm not sure what it is, but this debate is not relevant to the motion.
I don't have the motion in front of me. Can you? I mean, is it long? Can you just?
It's not that long. It's just given that on April 1st, the Liberal government increased the consumer carbon tax by 23%. That 70% of Canadians and 70% of provincial premiers are opposed to the latest carbon tax increase. That the NDP Premier of Manitoba recently came up against the carbon tax and plans to put forward a proposal to exempt the province from the carbon tax. The committee reports to the House its recommendation that the Liberal government abolish the consumer carbon levy, more commonly referred to as the carbon tax.
Okay,
So
go
it
ahead.
seems very relevant.
Thank you for reading that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My point of all of this is that Conservatives are not alone. There are multiple people from multiple parties across Canada that now firmly disagree with the carbon tax. Now, my Liberal colleagues and their Environment Minister clearly don't care what their constituents are telling them. And I know that Mrs. Taylor-Roy and Mr. Longfield and Mr. Ali are clearly hearing from their constituents, and unlike the Parliamentary Secretary, which, as is tradition, must support his government, we have an opportunity to have the freedom of Liberal MPs come forward and stop supporting a proud socialist, radical activist environment minister who is previously best known for his arrest for scaling the CN Tower and climbing onto the roof of Alberta Premier Ralph Klein. So instead of shutting down debate, I would encourage my colleagues across the way to explain how many constituents have emailed or called their office and say that they do not support the carbon tax, because I am willing to bet that it is a hefty number. And we are all elected to help our constituents, and I think it's important that we listen to them. Despite the fact that we may all disagree on a number of policies, I think there's a real opportunity after 3 weeks of the 23% hike being in place in this country and angry Canadians from coast to coast to stand up to this Prime Minister. And I'd be remiss not to mention my colleague from Victoria, who said a few days ago the carbon tax is not the, quote, be-all, end-all.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Well, I somehow, go
He
ahead.
just misquoted me, so I would like to correct the record.
You want to correct the record? What did you say?
I said that the Liberals have been treating the consumer carbon price like the be-all, end-all of climate policy, like a silver bullet, that it is one tool in our toolbox to fight the climate crisis.
Okay. So that's on the record. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
I was going to agree with you, actually, because I think you're right, that there are many various ways to help reduce carbon emissions that don't involve taxing moms taking their kids to school or to hockey practice or to a tournament on the weekend or to a senior driving to the town next door to get groceries or to fill their prescription, or a farmer in Milton drying his corn at the end of harvest.
Because the reality is that this...
Okay, another point of order, yeah.
No, it's just he once again is referring to this as a tax, which is not what it is. He keeps
Again, it's
telling a half-truth about what this is, and
yeah, I
just
understand.
want to, like Madame Collins corrected the record, I'd like to correct the record that this is not a tax.
Okay,
it's a
understood.
levy,
Right.
and that it's all returned to the
That's
consumer.
right.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay.
I would urge the member opposite, in fact, all members, to come and door knock in my riding. Come to Winkler, Altona, or Elm Creek, or Carmen, and try to tell my constituents that this is not a tax, that they are, in fact, better off, and see what the response is. And I will happily come to any of your ridings and do the same, or we can collectively as a
Through the
committee
chair,
go across
please.
this country
Through the
and
chair,
door knock.
Mr. Leslie, through the chair, please. Please, through the chair.
You know what? I think it'd be very enlightening. I think it'd be very enlightening because, particularly
Through the chair.
through you, Mr. Chair, my colleague, Miss Taylor Roy. I was trying to correct that there. Okay, yeah.
Colleagues,
my
please.
apologies.
I will go to the points of order, and we'll get back to Mr. Leslie, but let's, do this in an orderly fashion. Madame Chatel.
Yeah. I think on the door knocking, inviting us to door knock, when they door knock last election in
that's not a
favor
point of
of
order,
a carbon
Madame Chatel.
pricing, what was the answer then? When you
Madame Chatel.
wanted to have, sorry, Mr. Chair, when they wanted to have
Madame Chatel,
a
c'est pas un
carbon
rappel au
pricing,
règlement, ça.
did they do door
C'est pas un
knocking
rappel.
then?
That is not a point of order. That is not a point of order, Ms. Chatel. Inaudible.
Mr. Leslie. Go ahead, please. But please stick to the motion and not so much to canvassing, yes.
I look forward to us all door knocking and hearing from Canadians on their views. My point is that the carbon tax is making it more expensive to heat your home, to eat, and to put a roof over your head. Now, I know you, Mr. Chair, made some comments in the previous meeting, and I respect you, and I don't want to bring into the fact that there seems to be a real lack of evidence, but that's the flip side of the entirety of this problem.
I have a point of order on that, but
Okay.
anyway.
I didn't try to quote you there.
Yeah, anyway.
My point is that the fact that this government, and I look forward to seeing what our motion from last meeting comes forward in terms of the modeling and assumptions to see what actually the emissions that are being reduced from this are. But my hope is that we don't just adjourn debate, that we don't just disregard the views of the First Nation chiefs across Ontario, the Liberal Premier from Newfoundland and Labrador, and frankly, my constituents, because that's my job, is to come here and defend them, and they are adamantly opposed to the carbon tax. Simply put, it's time we axe the tax for everyone, on everything, and for good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Van Koerden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, apologies to the witnesses. This happens all the time in these meetings now. I'm sorry that your time is being wasted. You're valuable experts. Your expertise and your testimony is important to our work.
Yes, what's the point of order? Who's doing the point of order? Yeah.
I'm not entitled to speak
Yes,
now?
we'll get back to you in a second.
Okay,
yeah.
sure.
What's the relevance to the motion?
Yeah.
Yes.
The relevance
it's not a
to the
point of
motion
order.
is that
Go
the
ahead,
motion
go ahead,
has been
Mr.
raised during a committee meeting, not during business, not during a neutral opportunity. But again, the Conservatives want to hijack this meeting for their own partisan desires. But when the Conservatives blame the cost of living crisis on carbon pricing and proven emissions reduction strategies, just as 200 economists across the country have validated, and I welcome them to bring the testimony from even one economist who suggests that carbon pricing is an effective way to reduce emissions, they're still only serving the greedy corporate interests of billionaire oil and gas executives. There's no rebate on the provincial gas tax that Danielle Smith jacked up on Albertans on April 1st. There is no rebate on the summer fuel surcharge or excessive oil and gas profits. However, the Canada Carbon Rebate does have 4 quarterly repayments as an incentive to use a little less gas and get a little bit more tax-free cash in one's account 4 times a year. So the Conservatives still don't have a plan for affordability. They don't have a plan for the environment. They don't believe in climate change. And they consistently prioritize the corporate interests of their greedy oil and gas masters over the needs of everyday Canadians. So for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I hope I haven't taken too long. I'm going to adjourn debate for now on this motion so that we can continue with our witnesses
We have
in a
to go to a
respectful
vote. On va passer au vote.
We're going to move on, and hopefully we will move on to listening to our witnesses.
Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield? Yes. Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes, definitely.
Mr. Van Koerden?
Yes.
Mr. Cram?
Opposed.
Mr. Leslie?
Opposed.
Mr. Mazur?
No.
Mr. Malillo?
Against.
Madame Posé?
Oui.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Taylor-Roy. For 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses. And once again, I'd like to apologize for that interruption as well, especially when we have experts in the room on behavioral economics and behavioral change. And Mr. Brower, I'd actually like to direct my questions to you because this is our final meeting with witnesses, experts on this subject. And throughout, we've had these interruptions. And we've heard from Professor Lazar that climate change is exacerbating the problems of drought, of floods, of so much to do with water management. And you have mentioned water pricing as a way to control that. I was wondering if you could actually, given that the member opposite has brought up pricing pollution, the pollution pricing program we have in place, comment on how important you think it is to put in these pricing incentives to get Canadians to change behavior and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And do you think it's a policy that works, putting a price on pollution?
I think there are sectors in the economy that speak the language of money. And so I strongly believe in awareness raising. When I was a kid, I was taught to brush my teeth and not use the tap water running. I also gave that message to my children, and I think it's very effective. It's an effective way of communicating that water is valuable and that you shouldn't spill it. At the same time, I also believe that we currently don't pay anything for the water that we're using. We're paying for the treatment of the water, and that's globally an issue, but also here in Canada. And so there is technology readily available that we can use, but that we're not using because there is no financial incentive to use it. Where I come from, my house already had a grey water tank to flush my toilets. It's crystal clear water. We don't need drinking water quality. That is very valuable. It's very costly to flush our toilets, for example. We're not using that kind of technology because there is no incentive. It's too cheap to...
I just have a minute, so I just wanted to ask, does this same behavioral economics, behavioral change apply to pollution pricing? So that when consumers are faced with a price on pollution, they're going to change their behavior as well as when there's a price on water and they change their behavior around water.
Yeah, so you generally speaking, you would. I cannot speak to carbon. I can speak a little bit to organic farming. And you see that there is still a huge discrepancy between the amount of organic food that we're buying and the conventional food. We're not internalizing the externalities associated with conventional farming in our food products. And so the food is offered very cheap, and there is no chance for organic farming. Already for 20, 30 years, the market share, at least in Europe, I don't know in Canada.
Yeah, thank you. So you're saying that these pricing signals do work to change consumer behavior and that we need to internalize the externalities like with organic foods.
And we need to have patience because it takes time. Because it's highly dependent on the baseline price that we pay. There's a reason why farmers don't respond right away if you introduce a price on the water, because they hardly pay for it. So if they pay a very high price already, and then you start increasing the price, they will feel it more and more. And so they will start reducing their water use or invest in more efficient drip irrigation.
So 23% increase in the price on pollution makes sense in that context.
We'll go to Madame Posé for a minute and a half.
Alors, je reviens.
I have a question for you, Mr. Lesser. We know that the North is melting. Our neighbors in the North have no, borders, and our relationship is not that friendly. Have you studied that? Are you talking about the Northwest Passage? Yes. Indeed. It is in the sea, but it is not the same dynamic as freshwater, as we're talking about. Yes, sovereignty is requested from Canada for the Northwest Passage, and that is something I'd like to further study. Right now, there is an agreement, because we are not in agreement with the United States. It is not a question of defense. Since the cooperation treaty was signed in 1988, we have agreed on certain things. So Washington is respecting Canada's position. They say that they are in disagreement when the sovereignty is brought up, and Canada is also respecting the United States position. So there is a bit of an agreement to observe this disagreement, and neither party is forcing the other party to change its position. I was thinking more with the melting of glaciers and so on. Perhaps there are other neighbors who might not be quite as friendly. For example, Russia. I was thinking of other neighbors in the north. I don't have much time left. I'd like to ask you another question. Can you send us a report that would be complimentary, because it might help to clarify. Thank you. On to Ms. Collins.
Chair. And to Mr. Lessier again, actually, you know what? Maybe for my last question, I'm going to ask Mr. Bauer. BC and Alberta have been facing these multi-year droughts. The water allocation system in Alberta is under scrutiny. Given the likelihood of more dry summers, wildfires, people worried about access to water, can you shed light on some of the kind of water economic issues as these kind of increasing climate-related stresses happen in communities? And how do we protect people's essential uses of water, like drinking, if we're talking about water markets?
That's a very complicated question, but what I do know from research is that if you start introducing economic criteria in the allocation of the water, you will reduce losses. And we had a speaker in the previous session that was talking about wildfires and the need for prevention instead of treating the results afterwards, the damage costs afterwards. So I think it's a matter of cost-benefit analysis in identifying what preventive measures for water allocation to specific essential sectors or uses of the water, what the benefits are. And in the case of wildfires, it's avoided damage costs. And so you can do that for every sector. You can identify how much does it cost if we pump the water in one direction and not in the other, and what are the benefits involved. And I think there is a need for more of that kind of economic analysis in the allocation of the water.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Cram now for 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to circle back to our witnesses from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Ms. Tadros, I believe it was you who said that there were still low-level radioactive waste at Chalk River. Just for the benefit of people who don't know the backstory, why is there low-level radioactive waste at Chalk River, and what exactly went wrong there in the 1950s?
Thank you for the question. So Chalk River, as you've noted, has been on site for a wealth of years now, from the very beginning in terms of the Cold War and working through different research. So the low-level radioactive waste that is currently being overseen at Chalk River, and we have site inspectors that are on site that do regular walkabouts to ensure radioactive waste management programs and monitoring programs are adhered to, are things like overalls or things that look cleaning supplies, mops, heads. Those make up the bulk of the low-level radioactive waste that is found at Chalk River. And again, why they're there, because when one works with the radioactive material and you need to clean up things, other things get contaminated. And we do have a classification system that we've identified in our regulatory documents to better understand the difference between low-level, intermediate level, and high-level waste and tailings, because we do have uranium mines here in Canada as well. So that's, I hope that answers your question. I don't know if Ms. Fabian Mendoza has anything further to add on the low-level waste inventory at Chalk River.
Okay, but all right, but this is all stemming from those couple of accidents that happened there in the 1950s. Like there's no new ongoing problems separate from the 1950s accidents. Is that correct?
It's not only a question of problems, it's a question of there is currently research being done at Chalk River. They undergo a research, they use radioactive substances, and anytime there is anything that is touching radioactive substances, there is going to be a transfer, and that could be on paper, that could be on lab benches and things they use, gloves that you wear in hot cells. There could be equipment. So it is there, and it's not just from the early days when these spills had occurred.
Yeah, I think we're out of time, Mr. Cram, but I would mention to everyone that President Jimmy Carter, when he was, I think, at the Navy as a nuclear physicist, came and got us out of trouble in the 1950s during a particularly difficult moment. So thank you to the witnesses. Professor Lasserre, je me souviens d'avoir lu un de vos textes.
Professor Lasserre, I remember having read one of your articles in Option Politique on the export of water, and I will read it again. So thank you for being here today.
And I wish everyone a good weekend. Thank you very much.